There are moments when, even while trying to move on, you keep stumbling upon signs that remind you of a single person. A name that shows up often, songs that trigger the same memory, coincidences that feel too loud to ignore. It's as if the universe is trying to tell you something. But what? Why does this figure keep resurfacing in your mind, even when everything around you seems to suggest you should forget them? This experience is not only emotional, it has deep spiritual and symbolic roots. In this video, we're going to explore what may lie behind these persistent signs through the lens of Carl Jung's analytical psychology. Discover how your unconscious, in dialogue with external reality, may be revealing something essential for your journey of self-discovery. If you've ever lived through something like this, comment below. I am ready to understand the signs of my unconscious. Firstly, when the universe seems to send repetitive signs about someone, the phenomenon can be understood as a deep reflection of the unconscious. Carl Jung described the unconscious not only as a repository of repressed memories, but as a living source of symbols, archetypes, and meanings that emerge in synchrony with lived experience. This repetition of signs is not mere coincidence. It can be interpreted as a manifestation of what he called synchronicity, external events coinciding with significant inner states without an apparent causal connection, but with profound symbolic value. The persistent figure of this person may represent more than themselves. They may be a mirror of psychic aspects that need to be seen, integrated, and understood. When we unconsciously cling to someone, we project parts of ourselves we have not yet recognized, our hidden desires, fears, wounds, or even untapped potentials. Jung called this projection the act of seeing in the other what we have not yet been able to see in ourselves. Moreover, this figure may be tied to the activation of archetypes such as the anima or the animus, the feminine and masculine aspects of the psyche that seek integration so that individuation can take place. The persistence of these signs may be the call of the self, the central core of the psyche, inviting you to dive deeper into your self-knowledge. Nothing that repeats is irrelevant. Recurrence is often the language of the unconscious, trying to break through to the surface of consciousness. The universe may not literally be speaking about him or her, but about you, and what still needs to be recognized within your soul. Many people believe that the signs the universe sends have a magical or mystical origin. However, from the perspective of Jung's analytical psychology, these signs can be understood as symbolic manifestations of the unconscious, which expresses itself through images, repetitions, and seemingly random events that carry deep meaning. The experience of repeatedly seeing someone's name, hearing songs that evoke their memory, or coming across objects and symbols that point back to them is not necessarily coincidence. Jung called this phenomenon synchronicity, the simultaneous occurrence of two or more events connected symbolically, but without an obvious causal link. The unconscious does not communicate through logic or direct language as we are used to in the rational world. It speaks through images, symbols, and emotions. When you notice a sign connected to someone, it may be your psyche's attempt to draw your attention to something latent within you. This something may be an unresolved emotion, an unconscious bond, a lesson not yet learned, or a part of your psyche you haven't integrated. The sign doesn't necessarily point to the person themselves, but to what they represent within your symbolic and emotional world. Throughout life, all of us store memories, experiences, affections, and traumas. Not all of this is accessible to consciousness. Much of what we live through settles into the unconscious, shaping our choices, reactions, and perceptions. When something in the present connects with these deep contents, the unconscious may try to surface through symbolic phenomena. The face of that person who keeps appearing in your dreams, the number that repeats every time you think of them, the places that trigger specific memories, all of these can be seen as symbolic material. What is outside echoes what is inside. And it is precisely this dance between the inner and outer worlds that forms the basis of what Jung called individuation. The signs often function as invitations to look within, to investigate what is being projected onto that other who seems so important. It may be a call to heal an old wound, to close an unconscious cycle, or to recognize parts of yourself that have been neglected. The unconscious uses repetitions and coincidences to capture your attention, because if it relied on rational means, you would likely ignore it. That's why, when signs appear frequently and insistently, you must ask, what is this trying to show me about myself? Which part of my psyche wants to be seen through this constant reminder? Is this person really the message? Or are they just the messenger of something greater? This change in perspective is essential for anyone seeking self-discovery. Instead of chasing external answers, we begin to explore the symbolic landscape of our inner world. We start to understand that everything in the external world that deeply affects us has an internal mirror. And the signs the universe sends are not commands to be obeyed, but symbolic doors opening so we can dive deeper into our own soul. By recognizing the signs as the language of the unconscious, we stop feeling like victims of fate or trapped in repetitive romantic cycles. We begin to see that there is intelligence and purpose in what manifests repeatedly, and that this intelligence does not come from outside, but from the self, the regulating and integrating center of the psyche, constantly guiding us toward wholeness. When we interpret the signs with awareness, they stop being unsettling riddles and become opportunities for growth. It's not about deciphering a mystery out there, but about accepting the invitation to look inward, and with courage, listen to what the unconscious is trying to say through the images that disturb or fascinate us so deeply. We don't always fall in love with or fixate on someone because they actually have extraordinary qualities. Many times we are deeply impacted because they awaken something within us that we have not yet consciously recognized. Carl Jung called this projection, the tendency to attribute to others qualities, feelings, or aspects within us that we have not yet identified or accepted as our own. Projection is one of the main mechanisms behind human relationships, especially the most intense and emotionally charged ones. When the universe insists on reminding us of someone, we may be entangled in a deep projection. In this process, parts of ourselves are cast onto the figure of the other, who symbolically carries everything we are trying to see or live out. That person then becomes a symbolic mirror of our unconscious. We don't see who they truly are, we see what they represent for us. This explains why someone can leave such a deep mark on us, even with little contact, or why it's so hard to let go of someone who, rationally, no longer belongs in our life. Projection is especially powerful when it involves elements we deny or repress. The shadow, another key concept in Jung's work, is formed by everything we exclude from our conscious identity. When we project this shadow onto someone, we feel intense attraction or repulsion, because in truth we are reacting to ourselves. The other becomes the stage on which our deepest emotions are played out, often without our awareness. People who impact us strongly often carry, in our unconscious imagination, aspects we are trying to integrate. They may represent our repressed courage, hidden sensuality, unexpressed anger, or even positive qualities we haven't yet allowed ourselves to embody. This means the stronger the impact, the greater the symbolic charge of the projection. That's why certain relationships are so hard to forget. It's not the person we miss, but the part of us they activated. Projection can also create idealizations. We see the other as the perfect partner, the savior, the soulmate, without realizing we are facing inner constructs that need to be integrated, not pursued outside. Jung warned that when projection is not recognized, it can trap us in cycles of emotional dependency, romantic illusions, and dysfunctional relationships. But when brought into consciousness, it offers a powerful path to self-discovery. When signs about someone keep appearing, it may be the unconscious signaling that the projection hasn't yet been understood. This doesn't mean that person has a final role in your life, but that they triggered inner contents requiring attention. Sometimes, simply recognizing the projection is enough for the signs to stop, because the symbolic lesson has already been absorbed. Understanding projection is liberating. It allows us to reclaim the psychic energy we invested in the other and redirect it inward toward our own growth. We discover that the love, desire, fear, or pain we feel has less to do with the other person and more to do with our own emotional and symbolic history. This shift in perspective doesn't erase the feelings but makes them more conscious, less compulsive. The people who challenge us the most emotionally are often those who reveal the most about ourselves. They show us where we are still incomplete, where wounds remain open, or where untapped potentials lie. Instead of seeking answers or validation in them, we can thank them for being the mirror that reflected something essential, and from there, begin the process of reintegrating those parts into our psyche. Jung invites us to withdraw our projections from the other and reintegrate them into ourselves. This is one of the most important steps in individuation, recognizing that what we see outside is first and foremost an expression of what lives within. Thus, the person who marked us so deeply ceases to be an external figure and becomes understood as a symbolic key to our own inner transformation. There is a kind of connection that goes beyond the rational plane, a sense of immediate recognition, as if that person awakened something dormant within us. This inexplicable attraction, which often defies logic and imposes itself with overwhelming force, can be understood through one of Jungian psychology's deepest concepts, the soul archetypes, anima and animus. Jung observed that all of us carry within us an unconscious image of the opposite sex, shaped over time by experiences with parental, cultural, and symbolic figures. In men, this aspect is called the anima, the archetype of the inner feminine. In women, it is the animus, the archetype of the inner masculine. These archetypes are not mere gender representations, but expressions of psychic aspects in constant search for integration. They form the soul image and exert powerful influence over our emotions, choices, and relationships. When we meet someone who unconsciously fits that inner image, it feels as though we've found the right person. The projection of the anima or animus can generate a profound, almost mystical enchantment. The person seems to touch our very essence, awakening intense and often conflicting emotions. That is why these relationships are often marked by extremes, passion and pain, desire and rejection, closeness and distance. The power of the encounter doesn't come from the person themselves, but from the activation of the soul archetype. This inexplicable attraction is really the unconscious trying to lead us toward integrating these inner aspects. The problem is that when we project anima or animus onto another person, we lose touch with those elements within ourselves. We seek in the other the wholeness we should find in our own individuation process. Thus, we become dependent on the other to feel what we should learn to access within. Sensitivity, intuition, strength, rationality, creativity, presence. For example, when a man meets a woman who embodies his unconscious anima, he may fall madly in love, idealize her, put her on a pedestal. He is not seeing the real woman, but the projection of his feminine soul, his denied sensitivity, his repressed emotional side. In the same way, a woman may feel fascinated by a man who represents her animus, perceiving in him security, direction, power, clarity, qualities she has not yet recognized in herself. This type of projection can be extraordinarily powerful, but also dangerous, because when the image begins to break down and the person's reality shows through, the enchantment can fade, leaving frustration, disappointment, and confusion. Jung warned that the path to emotional maturity lies in withdrawing these projections, recognizing that what attracts us so strongly in the other is, in fact, an aspect of ourselves needing integration. The soul archetype is not only about romance or relationships, it is about inner completeness. When anima or animus is active unconsciously, we are guided by idealized images. When these archetypes are consciously integrated, they become powerful allies in our growth. The anima nourishes creativity, empathy, and introspection. The animus strengthens action in the world, structured thinking, and self-confidence. Thus, that person who seems to haunt your thoughts and emotions with a near mystical presence may not be a romantic destiny, but a mirror of the soul. They may be the symbolic messenger telling you it is time to look inward, to find where your wounded feminine or your dormant masculine lies. The signs of the universe in this context are not leading you to the other, but back to yourself, and to the task of becoming whole. By recognizing the influence of these archetypes, we can remove the expectation from the relationship and redirect the energy of fascination inward. The other stops being the answer and becomes the trigger for a much deeper journey. The true union then doesn't happen outside, but within the psyche, where feminine and masculine meet to give rise to the self, the wholeness of being. Repetition is often one of the clearest ways the unconscious tries to make itself heard. When certain situations, thoughts, feelings, or images keep resurfacing in our lives, especially concerning a specific person, it is not mere chance. It is a symbolic language, deep and insistent, revealing the existence of something not yet understood, resolved, or integrated. From Jung's perspective, the unconscious uses these repetitions to push us toward individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are, fully and wholly. Seeing repeated signs about someone, constantly being pulled back to memories, songs, places, or situations linked to them, can be a signal that something essential is trying to rise into consciousness. That person may symbolize a dissociated aspect of yourself, a repressed content, or a stage of psychic development that needs to be crossed. The repeating pattern is the unconscious's way of creating tension, movement, and transformation. It doesn't want you to remain stuck in the past, but to understand what that symbol represents for your evolution. The conscious mind tends to reject discomfort. Often, when intense emotional experiences arise, we try to ignore or quickly overcome them. But the unconscious doesn't operate in this linear time. It works through cycles, patterns, and symbols. And when an emotional experience isn't fully lived or processed, it repeats, not as punishment, but as opportunity. Repetition is the reminder that something inside you is still active, still seeking understanding, still waiting for reintegration. This is where the concept of individuation becomes essential. For Jung, individuation means becoming a unique, whole being by recognizing and integrating all aspects of the psyche, including those denied, forgotten, or projected onto others. When the unconscious repeats certain signs and symbols, it is actually inviting you to dive deeper into your soul. It is showing that there are parts of you that have not yet been embraced, that must be seen in order for true maturation to happen. When the same type of relationship, the same kind of pain or fascination repeats across different people, or when a single person remains a central symbol in your emotional life, this is really the echo of something internal. It is not necessarily about that person, but about what they represent within a symbolic process. And this process is the path to self-discovery and liberation. Consciousness is born from repetition understood. Instead of asking, why does this keep happening? The more productive question is, what is this trying to teach me about myself? What is not integrated returns, and it returns until we can look at it not with judgment or a need for control, but with listening and openness. Repetition is also the beginning of transformation. When we can recognize the pattern, we can transcend it, not by blocking it, but by moving beyond it. This means leaving behind automatic reactions and stepping into a more conscious state of existence. It means realizing that what repeats is not punishing us, but shaping us. The unconscious wants us to awaken, to grow, to stop projecting, and finally, to reclaim who we are. So if the signs about a person keep appearing, perhaps it is not to bring you back to them, but to bring you back to yourself, to dive into the symbolic layers of your own soul and acknowledge what is still alive, still asking for healing. The person is the symbol, and the symbol is the bridge between who you were and who you can still become. Individuation is this silent call expressed through recurring images, through encounters that feel like destiny, through memories that refuse to fade. And when you finally accept to look at it all with depth and awareness, something begins to reorganize inside. What once was compulsive repetition becomes learning. What once was attachment becomes release. And what once was just him or her becomes part of your own story, seen now with clarity and purpose. In that moment, the soul grows stronger. And what once felt like a prison reveals itself as a portal. When the universe seems to insist on showing us signs about someone, it's easy to interpret this as an external call, a warning, or even an inevitable destiny. But through the lens of Carl Jung's analytical psychology, we learn that these signs are not messages about the other. They are deep reflections of ourselves. The unconscious uses images, repetitions, and symbolic connections to reveal what still needs to be acknowledged, felt, and integrated. The figure that repeats so often may only be the messenger of inner content that demands attention. They may represent a projection, an archetype, a wound, or even a forgotten potential. Recognizing this is the first step toward emotional freedom and psychic maturity. It is the beginning of true individuation, the return to one's own soul. So instead of asking why you can't stop thinking about someone, ask what that memory is trying to teach you about yourself. Look within, listen to the signs consciously, and allow them to lead you back to yourself. If this content touched you in some way, subscribe to the channel and watch the recommended video on screen. Your transformation begins with a simple gesture, listening to what your soul wants to say.